Hi, this is Mrs. Howell. I'm going to try to get through this for you today. We are going to start Module 9A, and this is the peripheral nervous system. Last week was the central nervous system. Now we're moving on to the peripheral nervous system. Don't forget, red words on the slides will fill in the blanks on your guided notes. Stars throughout the slide presentation point to future test questions. Here we go. So when we first began studying the nervous system, that was a couple of modules ago, we learned that the PNS, or the peripheral nervous system, is divided into two basic divisions. We have the afferent and the efferent neurons. And we had trouble with that last week in class, so let's try to get this straight because you need to know this. Afferent neurons send signals from the sensory receptors, like your fingertips or your eyes or your ears, toward the central nervous system, toward the brain. The efferent neurons are those that send the signals from the central nervous system, like the brain, out to the effectors. So the brain tells the biceps to contract so that you can pick your fork up. So the effect of wanting to eat is lifting your fork. So the efferent neuron sends the signal from the brain back to the effector muscles or organs. You might remember that when we introduced efferent nervous system, gosh, it's been 2 chapters ago, we mentioned that it was further divided into 2 different systems. I don't know if you remember that slide presentation, but we divided this group into 2, then we divided that group into 2, and then we divided that group further into 2. Well, here we go. So the efferent neurons are divided into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Somatic motor nervous system, SMNS, and the autonomic nervous system, the ANS. So we're really going to focus on the AMS, but we need to note a few differences in both of them before we get started. So here is a chart. It doesn't really look like a chart on the slide, but on your guided notes, I want you to fill in the chart with these words in red. So the column on the left is your somatic nervous system, and the column on the right is your autonomic nervous system. So on the left, we've got skeletal muscles. That means that your somatic nervous system is working with neurons that are traveling from the brain to your skeletal muscles. The autonomic nervous system on the right is taking information from the central nervous system and going to your smooth muscles, which are those that create your organs inside your gut, as well as cardiac muscle, your heart, and glands within your body. So in both of these columns, we're going from the brain to the effector muscles, so skeletal muscles or smooth and cardiac. In the somatic nervous system, first column, that always is a voluntary reaction. You are thinking, I want to eat, I will pick up my fork. So the skeletal muscle of your bicep, you voluntarily, with thought, pick up a fork and pull the fork up to your mouth. Whereas the autonomic nervous system is totally involuntary. Those are your reflexes. You can't make that decision. It just happens, like it or not. When you smell something delicious cooking in the kitchen, the autonomic nervous system is involuntarily causing your mouth to salivate. You don't have to think, okay, body, make some saliva. It does it on its own. So that's part of your autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system utilizes a single neuron moving from the spinal cord all the way out to the effector. So some of those are very long. The autonomic nervous system involves pairs of neurons. There are 2 neurons for each action. So one is a long preganglionic and the other is a short postganglionic. There's a ganglionic region in between. If you want to read more about that in the book, you can. In the somatic motor nervous system, all the axons in this system are myelinated. They all have Schwann cells. They all follow a saltatory transmission of the action potential. The autonomic nervous system has those 2 neurons, and only the preganglionic axon has myelin. So only one of the 2 is myelinated. Also, the somatic nervous system has 1 neurotransmitter. We've talked about this one a long time. It's acetylcholine. In the autonomic nervous system, there's 2 different neurotransmitters. There's acetylcholine for the preganglionic neuron and norepinephrine for the postganglionic. The response in the somatic nervous system is only excitatory, But the response in the autonomic nervous system could be either excitatory or inhibitory. The autonomic nervous system, here we go, can be divided down into two subdivisions. We have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And remember that both of these act without any conscious thought at all. You don't have to think about the sympathetic fight or flight response, and you don't have to think about the parasympathetic housekeeping homeostasis maintenance within your body. The parasympathetic and sympathetic work together on certain organs and functions in a way that balances them out. So examples of organs that are balanced by the two systems would be your heart, your lungs, your digestive system organs, your salivary glands, your vision, and urination. So you've got certain neurons that travel on the sympathetic system to excite and increase your heart rate. And then you also have the parasympathetic nervous system involved in returning that heartbeat back down to a slower rate. So think about how your own body responds during times of stress. And if you can't think of a time that you've been stressed, picture a character in a movie and when they are undergoing a rapid car chase or somebody is running through the woods, somebody's chasing them. And if you think about how they respond or how you've responded, this will help you remember which system is responsible for which action. Remember that the sympathetic system is responsible for the arousal in the body, the high heart rate, the rapid breathing, the dilated pupils. The parasympathetic system relaxes the body, brings the heart rate back to normal, slows down your breathing, gets your temperature back to a normal temperature, those kinds of things. The sympathetic system also can work by itself without any assistance in regulation. When your body has to have dilated blood vessels, increasing blood supply, an increase in the amount of glucose quickly into your bloodstream, and when the hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine increase your heart rate in that time of panic, those are sympathetic system actions that occur by themselves, and sometimes they don't have the parasympathetic following behind. An example of this would be if you've ever been in a vehicle that was driving down the road, whether you were driving or you were a passenger, and the car hydroplanes. And you don't really want the car to hydroplane because you lose control. So when you have that very spontaneous, quick loss of control of a vehicle, you tend to panic all of a sudden. It's like, oh my gosh, and your hand grips the steering wheel really tight and your shoulders get tight and your heart rate increases and you might get sweaty palms and you breathe a little faster. And then the car tires regain traction and you regain control and everything's back under control and everything's fine. Well, the sympathetic nervous system stimulated all of those things to kind of release all those panic flooded feelings in your body. And because the parasympathetic is not involved in that situation, it takes a while for your body to kind of let go of that extra hormone and to get your blood vessels to go back to normal and the heart rate to slow back down to normal. And that's why sometimes it may take a little while and you drive down the road for another 5 or 6 minutes and you're like, I'm still a little nervous about that. And that's the reason. So far we've discussed the efferent division of your peripheral nervous system. Remember, the efferent goes from the brain and out to the effector muscles. Those are the neurons that connect in that direction. But now we're going to focus our attention on the afferent division. So that's the one that sends those action potentials from your sensory receptors toward the central nervous system. So first let's define sensory receptor. A sensory receptor is an organ which responds to a specific type of stimulus by ultimately triggering an action potential on a sensory neuron. Blah, blah, blah. That sounds like a lot. Notice there's a star there, so write down that definition, but I really wish you'd put it in your own words. So let's think about that. A sensory receptor is an organ or something in your body that has that responds to stimulus by causing an action potential to travel on a sensory neuron. Given a few examples of that to help would be the cochlea of your ear, the stimulus is sound, and it takes the information on the neuron to the brain for you to transfer that into the understanding of sound. The retina of the eye helps you to see. Olfactory receptors of the nose help you to smell. So all of those are sensory receptors. There are three main types of sensory receptors. There's a somatic receptor of the skin, muscles, and tendons. And your book also mentioned one called the cutaneous receptor. That's specifically of the skin. So somatic. The second of the three is the visceral receptors. Those are the ones that are in your internal organs. So when your stomach is stretched, when you've eaten a meal, there's receptors that are there that within the viscera, within your internal stomach organs or organs of your abdomen, that tell you to stop eating. It's stretched to its limit. And then you also have special receptors, and those are in specific locations that regulate your taste, smell, hearing, vision, which are 4 of the 5 general senses, and also balance to keep you able to walk in a straight line. So in order to trigger an action potential, these sensory receptors have to respond to something, so they're classified by the way they respond. So this is your last chart that we need to fill in before we're done today. So in response to movement, we classify that as mechanoreceptors, like mechanical, mechanoreceptors. In response to heat or cold, we call those thermoreceptors. Notice the star. Response to light are photoreceptors. Those are in the eye. Chemicals, the response is a chemoreceptor. And then in a response to pain or excessive stimulation, those are called nociceptors. So nociceptors are the ones that respond to pain, but also excess stimulation, meaning the difference between warm and hot. So when you've got a lot of increased action potentials, the nociceptors are dealing with that. So we're going to stop here for now because I think we've had enough. And next lesson we'll pick up and discuss the general senses. And we're going to talk about the eye specifically, as well as all these others. But we're going to specifically focus in on the eye. And we are going to talk about dissecting the eye next week. So I look forward to seeing you then.